You know how overwhelming information overload can be, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially when it comes to keeping a tiny human alive.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly stressful.
It really is. So, welcome learners to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
You go online to look up just a simple question about infant nutrition, and suddenly you are bombarded with rigid schedules and precise ounces.
Growth percentile.
Yes, growth percentiles and just absolute panic.
It is the definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, the sheer volume of conflicting advice can make any logical person feel completely unmoored.
Right.
You're just left wondering if you're somehow breaking your child by feeding them, 5 minutes off schedule.
Exactly. So whether you are holding a baby right now, or maybe you're prepping to support a friend who just had one, or whether you're just insanely curious about how the human machine starts up from scratch, we've got you covered today.
You really do.
We're unpacking the essential guide to baby nutrition and feeding by pediatrician Dr. Mahesh Yadav.
Sourced from BePeace.in.
All right, from BePeace.in. Our mission today is simple. We're going to cut through the confusion, separate normal biological chaos from genuine warning signs, and find those real aha moments about early human development.
I love that.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin with a topic that carries so much ambient anxiety?
Well, what's fascinating here is that when you actually look at the clinical guidance, like when you strip away the internet forums and the targeted ads for tracking gadgets, Dr. Yadav's overarching message is one of profound reassurance.
Reassurance, which is like the last thing you feel when you're Googling this stuff at 3 a.m.
Exactly. But he is delivering pediatric advice that essentially begs parents and caregivers to embrace irregularity rather than forcing strict schedules.
Wow.
He's asking us to accept that the biological reality of a growing human is fluid, it's not fixed.
So Dr. Yadav gives us this really reassuring philosophy, but he also lays down a very strict, neat roadmap for what actually goes into the baby during that first year.
Yes, he does.
We should probably establish those parameters first, right?
Right, definitely. I mean, the baseline rules of the road are quite clear. The chaos happens within these parameters, but the parameters themselves are foundational for biological safety.
Okay, so let's look at the first major phase, which is 0 to 6 months. The source outlines this as a highly specific nutritional window. Breast milk is best, formula if needed.
Right.
But the hard, non-negotiable rule here is no water, no honey, no other foods, zero. None.
Absolutely none.
I was thinking about this, and the best way I can describe a 0 to 6 month old's digestive system is that it's like an incredibly exclusive, highly restricted VIP club.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, and the bouncer at the door is just uncompromising. Breast milk and formula are on the guest list, but water, honey, or mashed bananas are strictly bounced at the door.
And that bouncer isn't just being elitist, right? He is actively preventing a catastrophic system crash.
The system crash.
Yes. If we look at the biology of why water's bounced at the door, it really comes down to kidney development. An infant's kidneys are immature. They simply cannot process large volumes of free water.
Wait, really? Just plain water is a problem?
Just plain water. If you let water in, it dilutes their blood sodium levels. And this can lead to a very real, very dangerous condition called water intoxication.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that was a thing.
It is, and it can cause seizures or even worse.
Okay, I have to push back a little here because it is easy to say no water on paper. But if it's a 100-degree summer day, a parent's immediate instinct is going to be to give a visibly hot, sweating baby a sip of water.
Naturally.
So why is Dr. Yadav so militantly against something that seems like pure common sense to an adult?
Because breast milk and formula are already about 80 to 90% water.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so they provide all the necessary hydration without throwing off that delicate sodium balance we talked about. Plus, in those first 6 months, every single milliliter of space in that tiny stomach is just prime real estate.
Because it's so small, right?
Exactly. A newborn stomach is roughly the size of a cherry at birth.
A cherry. That is wild.
And it only grows to about the size of an egg by month 1. So if you fill that tiny space with calorie-zero water, you're displacing the dense fats and nutrients that are required to literally grow a brain and a nervous system.
That makes total sense. You just don't have the room for empty calories.
Whoa.
Or, I guess empty hydration.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And regarding honey, that is another strict ban because of botulism spores.
Right. I've heard about the honey thing, but why is it fine for us and not for them?
Well, an adult's highly acidic stomach easily destroys those spores, but an infant's stomach acid is just too weak.
So it can't fight them off.
Exactly. It allows those spores to germinate and produce toxins. It is pure biological survival mode at this stage.
Which makes the 6-month mark seem like a massive physiological pivot.
Oh, it really is.
Because the source notes that at 6 months onwards, the gut is finally ready and you start solid foods. You continue milk, but the key phrase Dr. Yadav uses is, introduce one food at a time.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the introduction of solid foods is basically an incredibly complex scientific experiment happening right in your kitchen.
That sounds intense.
It is. When Dr. Yadav advises introducing one food at a time, he's basically telling you to act like a clinical researcher. You are isolating the variable.
Because if you give them a chaotic mix of 5 new things on a Tuesday.
Exactly. If you introduce peas, carrots, and sweet potatoes all in the same afternoon, and the baby system has an adverse reaction.
Like an allergy or something.
Right, maybe a rash, maybe explosive digestive upset, you have absolutely no idea which ingredient was the culprit.
So you would know what to avoid next time.
Exactly. By introducing one soft food at a time and waiting a few days, you're running a controlled stress test on the baby's developing immune system. And you're adapting their gut microbiome to break down novel proteins.
That systematic transition naturally accelerates into the 9 to 12-month window. The guide says variety increases, you introduce soft family foods, and you encourage self-feeding.
Yes, self-feeding is huge here.
Right, so the newborn stage is just surviving. 6 months is the controlled experiment. But 9 to 12 months is classified as exploration.
Exploration, exactly.
Why is self-feeding emphasized so heavily here instead of just, continuing to spoon-feed them efficiently? Because letting them feed themselves sounds like a massive mess.
Oh, it's a huge mess. But the goal changes. At 0 months, the goal is getting calories into the system. By 12 months, the goal is neuromotor autonomy.
Neuromotor autonomy. What does that look like in practice?
Well, when a baby tries to pick up a single pea, they are developing the pincer grasp.
The thumb and forefinger.
Exactly, the coordination of the thumb and forefinger. And that is a massive neurological milestone.
So playing with their food is actually a developmental requirement.
Absolutely. When they smash a piece of avocado, map its texture with their hands, and then bring it to their mouth, they're building neural pathways.
That's incredible. So the mess is the point.
The mess is totally the point. Furthermore, introducing slightly chunkier, soft family foods forces them to practice chewing mechanics.
Even without teeth.
Even without teeth. Because the act of mashing food with their gums strengthens the jaw muscles required for speech development later on.
Wait, chewing helps them learn to talk?
Yeah, it uses the same muscle groups. Plus, the gag reflex, which sits very far forward in a newborn's mouth to prevent choking, physically moves further back into the throat during this exploration phase.
Okay, so Dr. Yadav gives us this incredibly neat, logical roadmap for what goes into the baby and how their skills develop.
A beautiful roadmap.
But the moment you actually try to execute that roadmap in real life, you realize the baby hasn't read the manual.
Not at all.
The actual process of getting the nutrition in rarely looks like a neat, predictable schedule. Let's look at the chaotic reality that Dr. Yadav says is perfectly fine.
This gap between our expectations and the baby's reality is where the vast majority of parental anxiety lives.
Oh, I bet. I mean, the source lists behaviors that fall under the category of normal. Listen to this: list feeding every hour, cluster feeding, falling asleep while feeding, sudden appetite changes.
All completely normal.
But if we apply these normal behaviors to any adult human being, it sounds like a medical emergency.
It really does.
Think about it. If you and I went out to a buffet and I aggressively ate a meal every single hour, and then I just sat there cluster feeding for 4 straight hours in the evening,
Right.
only to pass out face first into my pasta mid-bite, we would be calling an ambulance.
We would assume total system failure.
But for a newborn, it's just Tuesday. It's completely baffling. How on earth are sleep-deprived parents supposed to just accept this level of chaos as a standard metric of success?
Well, let's look at the mechanisms behind that behavior, right?
Okay.
Starting with cluster feeding.
Okay, break that down for me.
So cluster feeding typically happens in the late afternoon or evening, where a baby might want to feed almost continuously for several hours.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is. To an exhausted parent, this feels like the baby is starving or like the milk supply has suddenly vanished. But biologically, the baby is doing 2 distinct things.
That's the first thing.
First, they're tanking up on calories to prepare for a slightly longer stretch of sleep.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second thing?
The rapid, continuous suckling is actually a hormonal signaling mechanism.
A signal to who?
The mom, exactly. It sends a message to the mother's brain to release more prolactin, which is the hormone responsible for milk production.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the baby is essentially placing a massive delivery order today to ensure there is an increased milk supply tomorrow because they're about to hit a growth spurt.
So the chaos is actually the symptom of exponential growth.
Precisely. We live in a modern world driven by calendars and linear graphs. We expect output to match input steadily. But a baby's growth is not linear.
It's all over the place.
It happens in explosive bursts. Their bones are lengthening, their brain volume is expanding rapidly.
And what about the falling asleep mid-meal?
Well, when they fall asleep mid-feed, it's because digestion itself requires a massive diversion of blood flow and energy. They're passing out because their body is literally exhausted from the caloric effort of growing.
There is a wide range of normal. Not all babies follow the same pattern. That line from the source feels like permission to stop comparing your kid's feeding habits to your neighbor's kid's feeding habits.
Or to some arbitrary textbook average. Right.
Exactly.
Because the textbook average is just a composite. Nobody actually lives on the exact center of the bell curve.
But I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If total unpredictability like feeding constantly, passing out, sudden total disinterest in food is completely normal, how does anyone know if the baby is actually thriving?
That's a very fair question.
Because if the landscape is this murky, we need some kind of objective anchor. Otherwise, you're just guessing.
We do have them. That is the genius of Dr. Yadav's framework. He doesn't just say, embrace the chaos and hope for the best.
He gives us tools.
He provides specific, measurable, physiological indicators.
The baby dashboard.
I love that you call it that.
Well, think about it. If you're driving a car, you might feel some weird vibrations on the road, or you might hear a strange noise, and you subjectively worry the car is breaking down.
Sure.
But you don't actually pull over in a panic until a literal warning light on the dashboard turns red. In a sea of subjective worry about early development, Dr. Yadav gives us tangible, physical outputs we can measure.
Right. Let's run through those dashboard indicators.
Okay, so for signs of feeding well, the metrics of success are regular wet diapers, an active and alert demeanor, and steady weight gain.
And these are incredibly logical when you look at the biology. Regular wet diapers, usually 6 or more heavily wet diapers a day after the first week, mean the intake of fluid is sufficient enough to create output.
So it's proof the system is working.
It proves the kidneys are actively filtering and hydration is adequate.
And steady weight gain.
Steady weight gain is the ultimate historical data point. It proves that despite the erratic day-to-day, hour-to-hour chaos of cluster feeding or skipped meals, the net caloric intake over the week is positive.
That is so reassuring. And the active and alert piece leads perfectly into the red flags, the warning lights on the dashboard.
The things you actually need to look out for.
Right. The guide lists the times when you absolutely should worry and call a doctor. Those are poor feeding, lethargy, no weight gain, and persistent vomiting.
Right.
Now, I want to drill down on lethargy, because earlier we established that a baby passing out mid-meal from exhaustion is totally normal.
It is.
How do you, as a terrified new caregiver, distinguish between my baby is wonderfully milk drunk and sleeping deeply versus my baby is lethargic and I need to go to the hospital?
It is a critical neurological distinction.
Okay, break that down.
A baby who is milk drunk and falling asleep while feeding will still wake up eventually and have periods of being active, alert, and responsive to their environment.
So they still interact with you.
Exactly. They will look around, track movement with their eyes, and exhibit normal muscle tone.
And lethargy.
Lethargy is a profound systemic lack of energy. It is a baby who will not wake up to feed at all, whose limbs feel unusually floppy, and who cannot be roused to a state of alertness even when stimulated.
So they just won't wake up no matter what you do.
Right. It's an absence of basic neurological vitality, not just a deep post-meal nap.
So it's kind of the difference between your phone powering down for a software update versus the battery being completely dead and the screen just refusing to turn on.
That is the exact mechanism.
Okay, that makes it so much clearer.
And persistent vomiting is another clear dashboard warning that requires distinguishing from normal behavior.
Yeah.
Because spit up is completely normal.
Right, because of the faulty valve.
Yes, the cardiac sphincter, the muscle at the top of the stomach, is immature and loose in infants.
Okay.
So when the stomach gets a little too full or there's a burp of air, some liquid easily sloshes back up. That is spit up.
It's just a little overflow.
Exactly. Persistent vomiting, however, is forceful. It's the body violently rejecting the input.
Which is obviously a lot more concerning.
Definitely. If a baby is persistently vomiting, they are losing fluids faster than they can take them in, which directly threatens hydration and trips that red dashboard light immediately.
And when those specific dashboard lights come on, Dr. Yadav has a very reassuring rule. If something doesn't feel right, it's always okay to seek medical advice. You don't have to tough it out.
Right. He includes a clinical note that grounds this entire discussion. He states that in his medical practice, most feeding concerns in babies are simply part of normal growth and adjustment.
Most concerns. Meaning the vast majority of the time, parents rush into his office, terrified that the baby is feeding too much or too little. The baby is actually executing their biological programming perfectly.
Perfectly. These dashboard indicators empower you to trust the data.
Right.
When your anxiety is screaming at 2 in the morning because the baby has eaten 4 times in 3 hours, you can look at the objective data.
Are there wet diapers?
Yes. Is the baby gaining weight along their curve over the weeks?
Yes.
Yes. It allows you to logically override the very natural emotional panic.
Which brings us to the synthesis of this whole deep dive. Dr. Yadav ends the guide with a thought that really pivots the entire conversation.
I love this part.
Yeah. He says feeding is not just about nutrition. It's also about comfort, bonding, and growth. Trust your instincts, follow your baby's cues, and take it one step at a time.
It reframes the entire concept of what a meal is to a baby. We spend so much time hyperfixated on the mechanical transfer of calories.
Oh, completely.
We obsess over the milliliters and the exact minutes spent on each side. But he's reminding us that feeding is primarily a developmental and emotional transaction.
It's the first way a brand new human learns that the outside world is a safe place to be.
Exactly.
They experience a biological stressor like hunger, they cry, and someone responds with warmth, physical touch, eye contact, and nourishment. That isn't just digestion. That is the foundational mechanism of trust.
And that chaotic feeding schedule is them seeking that emotional regulation just as much as they are seeking physical calories.
Wow.
A baby's nervous system is incredibly immature. They literally borrow their caregiver's calm nervous system through physical closeness during feeding to regulate their own heart rate and breathing.
So if you're listening to this right now, whether you are in the trenches of the newborn phase, whether you are trying to be a supportive rock for a friend who is second-guessing every choice they make, or if you're just fascinated by the sheer resilience of early human development, remember this. The chaos is a feature, not a bug.
A remarkably well-designed evolutionary feature.
The unpredictability of early human growth isn't a sign that the system is broken. It is the visible evidence of a highly complex system rapidly coming online. We crave clear black and white lines. We want the spreadsheet to balance perfectly at the end of the day.
But human connection and biological growth do not adhere to a spreadsheet.
No, they don't. Which leaves me with a final thought to mull over. If feeding is fundamentally as much about emotional comfort, nervous system regulation, and bonding as it is about clinical nutrition, how much is our modern obsession with data interfering with that?
That's a great question.
If we're staring at a tracking app on our phones, logging every single ounce, timing every single session to the exact second, are we missing the larger picture?
I think we often are.
Does our desperate need for a perfectly measurable schedule actually interrupt the intuitive, beautifully messy bond we're supposed to be building in the muddy waters of those early months? Something to think about next time you reach for the tracking app instead of just, watching the baby.